The globalist think tanks and lobby groups continue their agenda inside the Western governments. They are not being challenged by the establishment, and now their ideas are being promoted by the corporate media. It's not the first time, continues to happen, but there's an idea that's been escalated now. Now on this channel we have previously talked about C40 Cities, and this is a crazy idea as a group in the name of climate leadership and of course making everything sustainable. They've come up with some very crazy ideas, and their ideas have been backed by the World Economic Forum. So just like any other think tank or lobby group, usually, especially the center-right or free market or pro-freedom think tanks and lobby groups get very scrutinized in the media. People ask, who funds you? People ask, what is your agenda? The think tanks that helped Liz Truss, for example, to come up with her policies were destroyed, saying, well, what's going on with our democracy that think tanks are now running our governments? Somehow, nobody asks questions when it comes to these globalist groups doing it. And their ideas are now being implemented by world leaders. So what is the C40? So, for example, they basically they got these ideas. By 2030, they got targets. So on the left-hand side, you got the consumption intervention. In the middle, you've got progressive target in 2030. But then on the right-hand side, ambitious target in 2030. So let's focus on the ambitious targets. By 2030, ideally, they want zero meat consumption, zero dairy consumption, that's milk and everything else, per person per year. And so that's basically 2,500 calories. Okay, so kilogram by calories per person. Then when it comes to reducing household waste, they want 0% household food waste. I'm not really sure how they can achieve that. Avoiding supply chain waste as well, 75% reduction. Oh, thank God. Okay, at least they haven't gone completely 100% or 0% with that. So what is happening here? So this group, they have implemented their ideas, been spreading around. They've got basically a network in every city, every major city they can think of, essentially, around the world, from India and China, the UK, US, Brazil, everywhere. And the whole idea is initially to just spread some suggestions that was on paper. But somehow, any mayor or prime minister or president, or basically mostly it's about mayors because it's about cities and local authorities, are implementing them without being challenged. So this is the whole problem I have with this ideology. The C40 cities also include London, chaired the steering committee, chaired by Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London. Surprise, surprise. So essentially, Sadiq Khan is the ambassador for C40 cities in London, one of the cities, obviously. We've got various networks in London. These are the groups involved in it. So you've got their private building efficiency network, zero emissions vehicle network, public transport network, that's TfL, walking and cycling network, food systems network. You've got various other things. You've got, what else do we have in there? Yeah, they've got air quality network, city business climate alliance, inclusive climate action forum. Inclusive. You can't tackle climate change unless you are inclusive, guys. Wow. All right. So this report initially came out in 2019, but the reason we're talking about this is because just now, this week, it's been re-emphasized, recommended that by 2030, we shouldn't really be permitted to eat meat or dairy products. And we will be limited to 3 items of new clothing per year and one airplane flight every 3 years. They also want to ban cars, so diesel, petrol cars and everything else, but that's already on the table anyway. The interesting thing about this is that in America, we now have 14 cities implementing these policies everywhere from Seattle to Los Angeles and New York and Portland. Of course, it's in Portland as well, communist land. But the corporate media are freaking out about new media holding them to account. So, for example, AFP decided to do a fact check, right? Because Glenn Beck in America, the conservative commentator, talked about this, saying that these proposals backed by the World Economic Forum would limit meat and dairy consumption in smart cities by 2030. This fact-checking says, well, this is false because the independent climate analysis shows that they don't make any specific policy recommendations. They're just talking about ambitions. They're just talking about ideals. They haven't actually enforced policy. So this is how they get away with it, because they think that we're idiots, and we think we're still living in a world where in the traditional democracies that we had until recently, where, for example, in America, the Congress, or here, the House of Commons, would have to implement policies with our consent, and that counts. No. We now live in a lobbying world. Everything is about lobbying. So all we have to do, the voters don't really have that much power anymore during the term between Parliament and, of course, in America as well, presidential terms. So you have lobbyists going around giving out ideas, not enforcing it, giving out ideas and suggestions with a bit of funding. And then somehow the leaders that we have, including the mayor, Sadiq Khan, somehow decides to implement those ideas. So technically speaking, yeah, they haven't forced them. Yeah, they haven't actually enforced legislation in that sense. But they just have conversations. They just have meetings. And somehow those ideas are being implemented without the consent of the public. So their fact-checking is nonsensical. Now, for example, we just had this in April. On the 17th of April in New York, the mayor in New York decided to commit to reducing the city's food-based emissions by 33% by 2030 after releasing new greenhouse gas emissions inventory incorporating emissions from food. So he is implementing the ambitious targets mentioned in that document. So they didn't force him, they just had a conversation with him. So where's the fact checking here? Because the ideas are being implemented. We have a problem with the fact that the ideas are being implemented without the democratic will. This is the issue. So on their own website, C40 says, we are a global network of nearly 100 mayors of the world's leading cities that are united in action to confront the climate crisis. So they got a few bullet points. One of them is raising climate ambition. So through the 1.5 Celsius climate action plan, and they have the building equitable and thriving communities. They've got building a global movement, scaling up climate action, and of course facilitating access to finance for investment in green jobs. So we basically have groups that, again, let's just call them lobby groups for the sake of the argument. Global lobby groups coming up with ideas, having these conversations with our elected politicians, and their ideas are being implemented without being elected, without getting the vote from the public across the world. So what is the point of even voting for political parties and world leaders when they're just going to do their own thing because they're listening to other people? Usually politicians used to get elected because they had to listen to the voters, especially local voters, say, okay, I'm going to be standing on this platform because my people want this. Not anymore. They say we're going to stand on this platform because Klaus Schwab has an idea. So this is not right. Whether you agree with the policies or not, the process is incorrect. It's an infiltration of our democracy. So let's go to some of the comments you guys have made on this channel recently about these things. We got J123 Tilly saying the Tory mayoral candidate has the charisma of this cloth. Why? Because the powers that be want our C40 city chairman in place. Sadiq will lead London into a totalitarian pit. That's spot on. We also have Chris saying the London mayoral system was invented by Labour for Labour. The role was created by a Tony Blair government and the first mayor was Ken Livingstone. People voted for it at the time because they believed and were told that it would benefit Londoners. But I don't believe it ever has. It's benefited people with vested interests, for example, C40 Cities and other agendas. Absolutely spot on, Chris. We have another comment saying the governments are heavily funding C40 Cities headed by Sadiq Khan. But none of it is going to be mentioned by the corporate media because it's not in our national interest. Let's just focus on government ministers and backbench MPs in the House of Commons because they hold true power, right? No, they don't. Because it doesn't really matter who you elect unless you stop listening, unless you have people being elected who stop listening to these so-called think tanks and lobby groups who are basically infiltrating our elected officers. This is the problem that we have. Anyway, we'll keep you guys posted on this issue as usual. I'm Mahyar Tousi, and we are the media.